Let's talk about environmental economics and some myths around it. A national park is littered with trash. Oh no, what a mess! So take a couple of minutes and discuss this to the best of your ability before you proceed. This is a very cool concept. Externality is a third-party effect, and it can be in the form of negative externality, which is imposing a cost on others without compensating them. The best example for that is pollution, because the environment is a shared space by everyone. Or there's a construction in the street and they're going like, and you want to study or sleep, right? What a mess. Or this baby here who is like, put that away, I'm suffocating here. Um, so what happens here is that the social cost is the same as total cost or net cost, including the externality. The individual doesn't bear all of that, so they're likely to indulge in it more than they would if they were to pay for their action fully. There is also positive externality when others benefit from you, but you're not paid for it. This is not a big deal. It's not a big problem. It's just that there is less incentive to offer it since the producer isn't fully compensated for it. Both cases result in inefficiency because either too much or not enough is produced compared to the optimal amount. So pause here, record the slide number, and summarize it in your own words. Imagine a steel plant which produces steel and CO2, and well, also the wastewater. What a mess. They produce something of positive value and something of negative value. But the thing is, they don't fully face the negative consequences of their action, which makes it a negative externality. Now, the solution is to internalize the externality by making them pay for the environmental damage through a carbon tax, which can be used to fund public parks or public transit. But that's kind of arbitrary. What's the value of the damage they cause? A smarter option is emissions trading through a cap-and-trade system, which incentivizes the firms to compete with each other to be more green. And this is a market solution which takes advantage of market forces for greater efficiency. Either way, the objective is to disincentivize pollution. When one drives a car, one creates pollution, adds to traffic, and raises the chance of accidents. A gasoline tax discourages all of those. This cartoon could have a point that pollution is not the only externality of a car. Besides, hybrid or electric cars aren't as green as you may think. Their life cycle footprint is more pollutant than combustion engines, although the technology is improving. Some cities like London or Singapore require a permit for downtown because of the congestion. So that's another form of taxation. Some other examples would be tobacco tax or alcohol tax. They're called a sin tax since they are meant to correct some harmful activity, as opposed to a distortionary tax like an income tax. It distorts the incentives for productive behavior. So the idea is that you are paying upfront for your lung or liver treatment in the future. A recent idea is a fat tax, since it's a burden on the healthcare and transportation. There are, of course, counter-arguments to all of these. Sometimes they're just an excuse for the government to raise its revenue. Why should someone be penalized for their weight just because they don't look attractive? What I want to emphasize here is that each person must face the consequences of the decisions that they make. This way, they'll have the incentive to make the most optimal decision and think twice before consuming that substance. A rival or rivalrous good is something that depletes with consumption, that can be used by only one person at a time. If it doesn't run out, it's non-rival. Remember the difference between goods and services? Goods are tangible versus intangible, physical versus non-physical. So goods in general are rival. Services can be either rival or non-rival. So for instance, attention is rival. You can pay attention to only this or that, whereas information is non-rival. If you use a mathematical formula, it doesn't reduce from others. Something is excludable if you can control who gets it, usually through a price or permit. If it's up for grabs to anyone, then it's non-excludable. So we're going to have a nice colorful table, and we're going to have 4 types of goods. So these are the names for it. So a private good is both rival and excludable. Like what? Like food and clothes, like this stupid kid. The cake that he has, if he eats it, there is less available to others, right? And he can exclude others from getting it, right? The same goes with clothes. Non-rival would be like Netflix or concert. You can watch a movie on Netflix, but other people can also be watching it at the same time. It doesn't reduce from them, but you have to pay for it. So it is excludable. Common resources are also called common pool or common property, like fish in the ocean or trees in the forest. So this is before the kind of permit requirements. In general, the nature of the good is such that anybody can go and catch it or chop a tree, so it's non-excludable. But if anybody gets a fish or tree, then it's going to be less available to others, so it is rival. And then public goods, also known as collective goods. The classical example is a lighthouse, but you can also think of street lights. Anybody passing there gets to enjoy it, right? And you can't really make them pay for it, right? And it doesn't reduce, right? So since it doesn't reduce from other people's enjoyment, it's non-rival. And since you can't make people pay for it, it's non-excludable. Of course, people pay for it through taxation, but not directly. And then national defense is the sense of security. So most goods and services are rival and excludable. Most things are private goods. And that's where the market works pretty well. These other three could result in a market failure, which is when, resources are not allocated efficiently because of the incentives being out of place. Now, something important here is, so what? If the market doesn't work, does it mean that we should get rid of it? If you have a bruise on your hand, would you chop it away? Or you put up with it? Remember, you must always ask, what is the alternative? Because the alternative may have its own bigger failure. Then what? Milton Friedman, my hero, said there is a smokestack on the back of every government program, which means government intervention also imposes a cost on third parties without compensation because it distorts the incentives and creates unintended consequences. So we don't want to be quick to jump to a conclusion very fast. So take good notes on this slide. Write down your own example of something rival and something non-rival, something excludable and something non-excludable, and also copy this table in your notes, but write your own examples of the 4 types of goods. So here's a useful practice. A road can be either congested or non-congested. Congestion, which is traffic, tells us whether it's rival or not. A road can also be either a toll road or a non-toll road. The toll determines excludability. So you have 4 types of roads for the 4 cells in your table. Good luck. You see someone jump over the metro gate and ride for free. Or you have a group project and there is always that one person who doesn't do anything and gets the group's grade. So pause here and write your own example of a free rider. That would be the market failure problem of non-excludability. As for non-rivalry, the problem is called the tragedy of the commons, like overfishing, overharvesting, overexploitation of any scarce resource, which results in extinction. And all this is rational. When something is open access but limited, then everyone has the incentive to go and grab it before the other guy comes. The solution is to have clear ownership laws because people take care of their private property while they may abuse public property, since the burden is distributed among everyone. And again, that abuse is also rational. Who would build streetlights? You can't make profit on it. You can't stop people passing by to pay you. You can't go and say, yo, if you don't pay, you can't pass. That's not doable. So the government can finance that through taxation, like the municipal taxes, or a more creative way is advertisement. So all the applications that you use for free, including Google search and online news, they're funded by ads. The Jazz Festival is another example. So pause here and write your own example of free rider, tragedy of commons, and government solution and market provision for public goods. Don't you hate how they release updated editions of textbooks every year, so you have to buy a new copy? In the long run, textbooks are non-rival. They can be passed on to the next cohort, but the publisher doesn't make money on the used book sale. So new editions are a way of making them rival, almost like an expiry date. Knowledge by nature is non-rival and non-excludable. That's why scientific discoveries are patented and artistic compositions are copyrighted to limit their access. Now you might be like, hang on, why do they do that? The economic explanation for it is to incentivize innovation. Because why on earth should a pharmaceutical firm invest so much on R&D, which is research and development, if they can't make profit off it? If it can easily be copied by others who free ride on them. So it can induce more economic growth. But the catch is now the firms put their resources into the bureaucratic maze, which is not efficient. Notice that the new edition is bottom-up, whereas patent is top-down. At the core of the environmental issue is a lack of precise property rights, and that shows where we need to work on. To the extent that the owner of a resource can be clearly defined, it will not be abused. Take notes. Wow, that was cool. The environmentalist concern is that our growing levels of production and consumption can't be sustained by the Earth's scarce resources. This is a rhetoric which has been running for centuries. Ehrlich and Suzuki have said it repeatedly. I've just given you a couple of dates. And these are scientists with a lot of credibility. But this is a forecast that's been proven wrong every time. And we're going to see why. For more than 2 centuries, scientists have been predicting the doom of humankind, and even going so far as proposing sterilization of the population. Now, to be fair, they got one thing right, that the environment is a common resource, and it's a scarce one. That was cool. What's so interesting is that the people in this camp, the apocalyptic prophets, never learn from their mistake. They always say, this time it's different. We are heading for imminent crisis and the world is coming to an end. Sorry, it is not different this time either, because you did not understand one thing, that humans are dynamic. Here's a process which explains why these predictions have always come out wrong. The market price is a measure of scarcity, and changes in market price affect the incentives of buyers, sellers, and potential entrepreneurs. And all these market forces work to resolve any scarcity issue in a very natural, bottom-up way. I want to emphasize 2 elements in this process here. The price of all natural resources have fallen over the past 100 years. Why? Because their proved resources have increased. Now we have far more above our consumption levels. We are nowhere close to scarcity. There are absolutely no grounds for the environmental panic that you hear commonly. These rhetorics only serve political interests, as we shall see. So climate change is a reality, and it has always been there. But calling it a crisis is a fallacy and does not stand to evidence. So take notes on these, especially the process here. Make sure you understand the market mechanism. I did my graduate thesis on environmental economics, which has been published as a book. Unfortunately, there is a wide gap between the hard facts and what you're commonly fed in school and the media. There's a lot of garbage out there. It's not because your teachers or the activists are evil. They're just not experts in the field. They're ignorant. In some professional academic circles, they call this, activities which don't serve the environment, but they serve our ego and sense of self-righteousness, such as, that's cool. These are some examples which are quite popular. The fallacy is to emphasize that these are beneficial for the environment without considering their full cost. When we look at the data, in most cases, the value that we save is less than what we put into it. Environmentalism is an enterprise whose revenues do not cover its costs. Oh no, I shouldn't have said that. It's a disgraceful failure. So let me go through some of them. In recycling, we waste more energy on shipping, sorting, and processing the material than what we get out of it. We are literally destroying the environment through recycling. And a single landfill in the US is enough for all anticipated American trash for the next 100 years. And incineration is another option, which has become quite clean and efficient. Besides, most of our recycling is outsourced to China or India, which have no or little environmental protection laws. If the objective was to save the earth, well done. And if you ask most people, they don't know about any of this, and they don't even care to know about it. They just feel good to recycle. They're convinced that they're doing something positive, and they sleep at night satisfied that they help the environment today. You must use a reusable mug at least 1,000 times to be more environmentally friendly than disposable cups. Not to mention its hassle, which is also part of the costs. Why should we care only about the well-being of dolphins and not humans? You must use an organic cotton bag at least 100 times to have less net impact on the climate than a single disposable plastic bag. Cotton takes more water than any other plant. And we are just a fraction of the world population. Our marginal value is close to zero. Anything that we save on plastic or carbon in a year, the people of China and India offset in a single day. Then we pat ourselves on the back that we are making a difference. Talking about green energy, to make 1 megawatt of wind power, it takes 15 times the steel and iron compared to coal energy, and 104 times compared to natural gas. Solar panels have a similar case with glass and aluminums. Electric cars should drive over 130,000 kilometers till they can become greener than a combustion engine. Now in Quebec we have hydro, but in most places up to a third of their electricity is generated by coal, and the rest is mainly by fossil fuels. Now that's real masturbation, and we take pride in it. And see what happened in Sri Lanka when they banned chemical fertilizers, the recent problems there because of international pressures and political publicity. For a poor country like them, organic farming is a luxury good compared to their pressing survival needs. Once again, your first reaction to any environmentalist should be at what expense. There is no need to panic. We are not facing a crisis. The climate has always been changing and we've always been adapting. We respond to incentives through innovation and we don't reproduce blindly like bacteria. I should emphasize the importance of technology in all this mess. So the environmentalist rhetoric shows two major lacks. One, they have no understanding of opportunity cost. They don't understand that what they're proposing involves major sacrifices. They don't even want to look at those trade-offs in the data. Two, they have no understanding of what is a market and how market forces work. The market is the most powerful tool for allocating scarce resources, including the environment. When someone doesn't have that, obviously they're going to resort to trivial solutions which make things worse and only serve as a pacifier. So pause here and summarize this slide in one sentence using your own words. Let's clarify something. Green energy has its own trend and it's going to grow as the market signals for it. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with it. The problem is when we only see its benefit and not its trade-offs. The problem is when we want to enforce it irrespective of cost. So far, green energy hasn't reached the level to fulfill our needs, and it's not even green if you look at the product cycle. It's fine to let these industries grow naturally, but why should the government subsidize them? Because that means favoritism. Since these energies are not efficient, they are only affordable to the rich. Besides, many of the poor don't even have a car and rely on big trucks for their food. So we are really taxing all of them just to have a nice political image. And because they're so expensive, we'll have less as a society to address other issues. This is called the broken window fallacy. So you might want to take notes on this. Breaking a window could actually create jobs through its replacement process. But that doesn't mean that it's a good thing for the economy, because the money used there could have been used for other products. So again, you see opportunity cost. Our subsidies on green energy also have benefits for sure, but at the expense of many other initiatives which could have been. Look at these facts. We're artificially pushing for solar power and electric cars at a high human expense. These are not priorities for the world we're living in. We are not serving humankind. Now you can see how we can degenerate even in morality due to lack of sound economics. Environmentalists have good intentions, they're good people, but they've lost touch with the evidence. Environmentalism today has every quality of a fanatic religion or cult. People adopt it as an ideology without even looking at the facts. To them, it's a matter of principle, regardless of any consequence. At the core of the environmental problem is that we are dealing with a shared space. Everyone must be on board for it to work. But that's impossible to enforce contracts, and we don't have an international authority to make commitments binding. And if you're thinking about the UN, well, good luck. UN is a toothless dog. So this is really game theory, and it's a classical free riding problem. Why should any country bear high costs when the benefits are shared with everyone else? The balloon effect is used for drug prohibition, but it's also applicable here. When Canada ratified the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, many factories shut down here because of the new regulations. So we got a negative shock of employment and GDP. But what happened to the emissions? They just moved to Mexico and China, where they don't have those standards, and the production methods are often dirtier. Oh no, what have you done? So here's a profound quote which you have seen before. Brecht wrote this in 1940 Germany. It's still applicable today. Hugging trees is good in itself, but at what expense? Pause here, my dear. Before I forget, here are two books which can open your eyes to a different rhetoric, all backed by extensive research and evidence. You may not agree with what they say or with what I said, and that's totally fine, but I hope you've gained some new sensitivity and nuance in developing your own authentic opinion. There are three main players who benefit from the climate crisis frenzy. Remember, the essence of government is concentrated power fueled by tax money, and taxes are not popular. But when you link them to a noble cause like the environment, they are more likely to find public acceptance. It also takes away attention from other areas where they are making a mess. There is rent seeking by certain corporations and organizations. It means bringing in the government protection instead of trying to be more productive. And this solar panel cartoon, unfortunately, it's not an exaggeration, especially in the US where numerous companies received subsidies during the Obama administration without producing a single megawatt of energy and then going bankrupt. Oh no, what have you done? The media's source of income is number of viewers. That's why you see in the news, whatever you see in the news is so tragic and not representative of the lives of people at all. If they were just to show a picture of how people are living their normal lives, they wouldn't have so much readership. They need to magnify anything into a crisis and spice it up. That's how they survive, and all that is very rational behavior. The worst of it all is when we impose these standards on developing countries who are just struggling to keep their head above the water. Look at the banning chemical fertilizer program, what it did to Sri Lanka. It's like our mental satisfaction and political interests have greater importance than the lives of the poor. What have we done? There's a lot more to say, but we have to wrap it up. My objective for you is to develop some sensitivity to ask meaningful questions and not fall for superficiality. So here are some practice questions based on what you learned. So take a couple of minutes and record the question numbers and the slide number and try to answer them using today's lesson. When something is non-excludable or non-rival, it will lead to negative externality, which causes a free riding problem or tragedy of commons, which itself can be due to commitment problems. And that is because of the balloon effect. Negative externality will lead to market failure. It can be fixed by a syntax which is often used to fund subsidies, but that can result in rent seeking. Non-excludability can be fixed by clear property rights. Non-rivalry is because of scarcity, which can be fixed by price signals, which itself incentivizes technology. Here I would emphasize negative externality, and in terms of the solutions, I would emphasize property rights and price signals. So we covered quite a lot of ground today. Review your notes and do a nice concept map of yourself that makes sense to you. Let's go back to our national park. How would you make sense of it based on what you learned today? So pause here and write down your answer using today's lesson. A good sample answer is that here we're dealing with the tragedy of the commons because the individual's cost is lower than the social cost. The government could add more funding to the national parks or could bring in prohibition. That will likely reduce the utility of the consumers, of the citizens, and may incentivize for smuggling and may bulge out in one way or another through some other mess. A bottom-up alternative is to auction the park to private owners who will have the incentive to take care of it, or to add an entrance fee so that it's no longer open access. Thanks for your patience and have a great day.